Hello, podcast listeners. This is your host with the most, JJ. Today's episode of JJ Meets World. Tucker and I get to talk about those people who made such an impact on our lives when we were younger, and I kind of have to think about who are we making an impact with now that we have aged into that group. All of that, so much more. Well, not a whole lot more, but at least more than I'm saying right now on this episode of JJ Meets World. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
All right, I want to start today's episode with a story from my own life that ties into what we'll be discussing. This last Friday, I just was going to be a bachelor for the night. My wife was going to be with some of her friends out of town. And so I decided,
it sounded like you gave her a hall pass or something.
Yeah, like I gave her a hall pass. She went to visit a bunch of friends, and then she fell in love with Crown Royal Peach. And she's like, it's so good, it's so tasty, it mixes well with everything. I said, how much did you drink while you were out? So I decided I wanted to have dinner that I enjoy, which would be chicken tenders. Love me some chicken tenders. So I stopped.
And I'm already picturing this as you, some chicken tendies out in front of you, and maybe 2 or 3 different dipping sauces in their own little bowls off to the side.
You know it, actually. So I've got a honey barbecue, a restaurant ranch that I buy by the tub now, and some buffalo sauce. So you're absolutely right, Tucker.
But
before
I
even get these delicious dipping sauces in front of me, I made a social faux pas unlike anything other. So I go to the deli section of my local grocery store, which is a smaller version of their regular grocery stores. So it's kind of an express version. And the woman behind the deli counter is helping a customer. He gets done. I walk forward and I instantly think, I know who this is. This is my friend Kevin's daughter, Grace. It has to be. But I can only see her eyes because she's wearing a hairnet. She's got a black face mask on. And when I step up there, she's like, hi. And then she goes, and I say 10 chicken tenders, please. And because I wasn't certain enough that I wanted to be like, hey, Grace, how's it going? And then there's an awkwardness. And it seems like she kind of like looks at me for a second and goes, okay. And then she starts, and I'm like, oh my God, if this is Kevin's daughter, I should have said, like, how's it going? How's school? It's your senior year and you're almost done. And so I am embarrassed trying to think, how can I make this seem where I'm not just a complete and total jerk? I'm not an adult who completely forgot who you are. Because I've met Grace many times. So I started thinking about like, okay, I got to come up with a line here that works. And I'm even more convinced that this is Grace because she's taking a lot of time digging through the chicken tenders to make sure I get really good pieces.
And anyone who knows JJ knows there is no way to mistake JJ. JJ could be in a full gorilla costume and you'd be like, oh, that's JJ.
Right, exactly. So, and then also like how egotistical am I where I'm like, everyone remembers me.
No one forgets you.
No one forgets. So I decide, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this isn't Grace because I probably would have bumped into her at some other point because this is the grocery store that I use. It's a couple blocks from my house. Well, she stands up to weigh the chicken tenders because you pay by the pound. Name tag Grace. And I'm like, God darn it. So it definitely is. So then I come up with this humdinger of a line. She hands the chicken tenders over to me and I'm like, thanks, Grace. And she's like, oh, you're so welcome. And I say, it must be weird working at a grocery store and like your dad's always calling and being like, hey, don't forget to bring this home. And she goes, yeah, nope. And I said, oh, well, then definitely your brother John then. And then she just stares at me.
Oh,
So
no, JJ.
So I pay for my chicken tenders and I walk out the door and I decide I got to get to the bottom of this because maybe she's PO'd that I didn't recognize her right off the bat. And then I made this half-ass weird thing at the end trying to like, so I call her dad and I'm like, please tell me that your daughter Grace worked at the deli section of my grocery store. He's like, nope, she works at Cold Stone Creamery. And I thought, well, there you go. I can never go back to that grocery store again. Oh, God. So it is now. And so I have now I posted it on my Facebook page because I really wanted people to weigh in on this. And I was hoping someone would say, oh, I know Grace. Yeah, she was talking about a real A1 creeper because that's what it seems. It definitely seems like I was trying to strike up a conversation and most likely, like hit on her.
You know what's better, though? What would be even better is if that Grace also has a brother named John.
And she was like, this is creepy.
How does this guy know my brother John?
And so luckily, Norma, who is like a 75-year-old clerk there, who she calls me her celebrity and wants a hug every time I'm in. I think she will be my saving grace. And I'll be like, Norma, would you find out if and then I was like, should I go back the next day and explain to this girl what happened? Because I don't want to be the weirdo, but then is it even more weird if I explain it? I'm really up a creek on this one.
I really think this is you just walk away and let the universe handle it kind of thing.
You think so?
I think so. I think you've paid your dues by letting us all know about it on this podcast.
Okay, good. If anyone knows Grace, who works at the Hornbachers on University and just south of 13th Avenue, if you could just let her know, like, wasn't trying to be weird. It just sort of happened.
Also, and do you think at one point she was like, "Ugh, is this guy about to make a Grace Under Fire reference?" Like, if that's what she's really tired of is having to deal with Grace Under Fire comments. Is that
what Graces are worried about these days?
I'm just wondering if that Grace is, she's a blonde woman named Grace who I guess I don't remember if the character on TV worked at a deli. I don't think she did, but
she worked in a factory with Dave Thomas.
I know that you probably go very quickly to Grace Under Fire when you meet someone named Grace in your head.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do because I'm trying to think if I ever met a Grace. I think I have, but I can't recall. Like, there is no person named Grace in my inner or even outer circle.
Really? You don't have a single Grace, huh?
I don't think so. And I apologize. And Grace, I apologize if I'm forgetting about you. But Grace, I don't remember knowing you. So, yeah. Well,
this is how it ties into what I want to talk about today. So the Grace I know, I will be in very short order offering a chance to join Linebenders. She's graduating from high school. She's going to college in the area. She's an amazing improviser. And I will begin another opportunity to try and give some wisdom as well as be a resource for a young person who loves some of the same things I love. And I wanted to talk with you today, Tucker, about those adults that made an impression in your life when you were younger. And maybe they treated you as an adult. Maybe they were the one who provided you with resources when you hadn't necessarily earned the opportunity yet, but they saw something in you. And I think that those are important people to consider, especially now that you and I are the age where we can start doing that for a younger generation as well.
I weep for that generation. I really do.
I don't, because I think I've got a good bedrock set from the people who did better things for me. And it's ironic that I'm telling you this because just this last weekend while my wife was gone, I finally watched the Jay and Silent Bob reboot movie.
Oh, okay. I haven't even seen that yet.
Yeah. So Kevin Smith made a movie that essentially is rebooting the Jay and Silent Bob View Askewniverse. And it's got callbacks to every single movie he made, even like things like Cop Out and Jersey Girl and things that didn't take place in the View Askewniverse. And it was pretty, I mean, it's funny for someone who's a fan of those movies.
Right.
And who likes gratuitous swearing, but it deals with the fact that like they're dealing with the next generation, right? Like the generation of people who were all in these movies all now have kids, and it's time for these kids to be kind of finding their way. And they found out that, you know, they don't need to be, they don't need to be standing outside of a convenience store selling pot to make an impact on the world. So I wanted to start with a couple of educators who made a big impact in my life, starting with Susan Kolstad, who was my first grade teacher. And this is the watershed moment where I will remember her forever. She ignited my love of reading. So Mrs. Kolstad was a big art. Like every month we made a different windsock and we made stuff that we took home. I mean, I was more proud of the crafts and art that we did in that class than I've been of any other artistic type thing I've done in the rest of my life. My mom still, in fact, had kept some of the windsocks. We did one where it was watercolor and then you sprinkled salt over it, and the sodium kind of made the like color spread. Like it's beautiful. And I made it in first grade. And so not only did she inspire this love of art and appreciating the things that you did, right? Like you made it. This came from you. I showed you how to do it, but you got to customize it in any way, which I think is amazing. But I remember loving the book Lyle the Crocodile so much that she let me read it in front of the class one day. And she complimented at one point to my parents, like, Jonathan, and she's the only person who calls me Jonathan, by the way. She's like, Jonathan loves reading, and it's so important to him. And I think it's great that he loves this. And my parents were like, really? Like, he doesn't ever want to read at home. And she's the one who pushed my parents, like, you should try getting him some young readers chapter books and see what he can do. And it was because of Susan Kolstad that I got into reading as much as I did. Now, 2 years later, I was put in a remedial after school reading class because they said I wasn't developing fast enough.
Really?
No, it was the next year in second grade. But I think that's because my second grade teacher was a bad teacher.
Oh,
and like the class was, how do you tell the difference between a B and a D? And I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me, right? Like, and he's like, think of a B as a baseball bat. B goes to hit the ball, and the D is going to the dugout. And I remember like the other people who were in this remedial reading class that my teacher decided these are the kids who can't read ended up going to become valedictorians and going to like Duke University. These were not people who had trouble reading. She was a bad old teacher who should have retired 5 years earlier. At one point in class too, she called me a liar because I said, she was talking about water and how important water is to drink. And I'm like, well, you can actually get poisoned from drinking too much water, which is true. You can essentially thin your blood, right? Like you're not supposed to take in more than anything. And she's like, that's not true. You are a liar. And she made me write, I am a liar on the board.
What? How old was this lady at the time?
She had to be like in her like late 60s at this point.
So you want to cover both adults that shaped us positively and those you'd really like to stick it to.
Well, I'm only mentioning her because how could I have gone from being like a kid who read an entire book in front of the class 1 year and then 6 months later be a kid who needs to be put into a remedial reading class? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that's silly.
So Susan Kolstad, now this is how amazing Susan Kolstad is. She has followed me my entire life. So when I was in the Santaland Diaries at Theater B, I got a letter to my house, and it was a rave review from Susan when she had come to see the show one night. She sent me notes at various times throughout my life. And so it's amazing that she's tracked down my address, that she, wants to send these notes. And then she'll send messages with one of the gentlemen I work with in the sales department at the radio station, his wife was my 5th grade teacher at the same elementary school, and she would get notes from Susan and pass them on to me. So that is amazing. And then this is the thing that I think is like, this is what brought this on. So I love improv, obviously, and comedy. There was a young man who was in his junior year at Fargo South High who was undergoing like a chemo treatment. And essentially he'd be hooked up to these machines in a small room at the Sanford Medical Center for the better part of a day, like 7 hours for this chemo treatment. His name's Raymond. And so she was doing art. After she retired, she immediately started doing art with children who were undergoing cancer treatments. So while they were doing their treatments, they could be doing these art projects. What a woman, right?
No kidding. Wow.
So I was reached out to by Susan Kolstad because this kid said, I would like, I would really like to get into comedy. I'd like to talk to someone about it, like JJ Gordon, because he was a Fargo South High, soon to be grad. And he had kind of known me from, I was in a play that he was in at one point. And, just being around there and being an alum of Don Quixote's. So Susan reaches out to me and she goes, hey, would you ever want to come and meet Raymond and hang out for a little bit and just talk comedy with him? And it would mean a lot. So even this, we're talking 30 years later, literally 30 years later, she is trying to help me connect with a younger person the way I connected with her. And I went and I spent 7 hours with Raymond and we talked all day and we had a great conversation about comedy and, and about how I have no idea what the kids are listening to these days on their iPods. And I still chat with Raymond every now and then. He sends me a message on social media every now and then.
So how is he doing then?
He's doing really well. There's still challenges, but you'd never know. He's just a great kid and he's got a bright future ahead of him. And
shout out to Raymond.
And, and Raymond, I also think is wise beyond his years. In the time we were talking, he just was a kid who's got a good head on his shoulders and he's going to go places and do some great things. So Susan Kolstad really knocked that one out of the park. And even though she was my 1st grade teacher, I strive to make her proud in things that I do. And I think about how giving she was of her time, even outside of the classroom hours, and how important that is. And I also, when she retired from teaching at Clara Barton Elementary, they hosted this giant party that was out like in the playing field. They had a live band and they had food trucks. Students from like the last 45 years all showed up to tell her how awesome she was and how much they appreciate her as a teacher. And then the live band did tequila and she was the one who did the tequila in it. And that was so much fun. It was just an absolute blast. And I mean, that place was packed. And I think that is a wonderful gift to show someone how much you appreciate what they did for you. So
yeah,
I've got more, but I want to now give you an opportunity to talk about one of those adults who took time out of their lives to make an impression on you.
I have a big list of people I could totally go through. And so this podcast could go on for a long time, which I'm down with, but
lovely.
But I mean, if you know me, and we're excluding, I'm excluding blood relatives from this list.
Yep.
There's one guy that is clearly at the top of the list, and that's Greg Carlson. Greg is one of my best friends. He's been a collaborator of mine as well artistically, but before all of that, he was my teacher. And I met Greg. That would have been this. Excuse me. I would have met Greg the summer of '99 at Trollwood. The first summer I was eligible to take June session classes.
The summer of the Phantom Menace.
Yes, exactly. And I knew I wanted to do video. I knew that filmmaking and stuff was the thing I wanted to do with my life because I was already obsessed with it as a kid. And I wanted to learn about it, but I didn't, there was no internet really yet. Not really. I mean, it existed, but barely. It wasn't what it is today. I didn't have access to any classes in the Fargo public school system that taught you about this kind of stuff. So all I knew was what I could figure out, which was pretty much nothing, from our VHS camera at home. So when I took video classes from Greg, that was my first dive into learning any of these concepts of editing and lighting and everything else that goes into film production. But that wasn't really the important thing that Greg did. Greg has a lot of former students like me who really look back fondly on our time with him as a student of his, because Greg was the first teacher I met. And still, I haven't met a teacher who can match him at this, who he has this ability to talk to teenagers as though they're not teenagers, they're just adults. And you do get the feeling completely that he takes you seriously as an adult, that he's not condescending to you. That he absolutely values you and wants you to grow, and is really passionate about the topics that he wants to talk about, which is, it's going to be filmmaking, it's going to be music, and it's going to be literature. It's going to be those three things. And once you get to know Greg, your horizons will just explode. They'll just expand like crazy, right? It wasn't until I met Greg that I was learning about all these different filmmakers and all these different musical groups and all these different authors. I just had no access to any of this. I had no one in my life who was going, hey, you like that? You should really check this out, right? My parents were amazing at cultivating my interests, right? But they didn't share the same interests that I did. So they didn't know where to point me next, right? They just kind of knew to kind of help make some things available. So when I had Greg finally in my life, he was like, hey, check this out. Check this out. He was lending stuff out all the time. And that's one thing that I've tried to take with me too is, well, it's rare that I ever feel qualified enough to make a comment, on wisdom and living one's life well, because I'm still working on that myself. But I do feel confident in going, hey, you like that? You should really check this out. And cultivating other people's excitement. And I think when a teacher does something like that, that's, in my experience, the most powerful version of learning, right? If you can get the student excited about the subject and then give them things that will pique their curiosity and make their excitement go further, do that. And then Greg and Greg is also an adult that I turn to even now when I'd like a perspective that isn't from, say, a blood relative or someone else. So during the pandemic, I've spoken to Greg on the phone a lot about things that bothered me or things I needed a perspective on or things I needed to talk about. And, he's family like that. So Greg Carlson is at the top of my list. And before I go on, I think I would just volley it back to you. But, JJ, you are also a student of Greg's.
Mm-hmm.
You took his class at Trollwood. Obviously, you don't have the same bond with him that I do, but you were a student of his. And so what was your experience with him as your teacher? Am I full of shit or am I saying truth?
No, this is what I appreciate out of Greg. Greg was the first educator that treated his class as collaborators rather than as students. And, it essentially, it wasn't the inmates running the asylum. It's not like he just sat there and he's like, you guys do whatever you want. It's, we want to do this effect. And Greg was the one like, all right, let's figure out how to get this done. And you guys are going to write this thing. And, I'm going to help you, with this. And it was amazing that at one point you forget that was even a class. Like, isn't it amazing that we got high school credit for taking that? Because I would have been doing that on my own. It's like if we had just been a group of kids who were together making these videos, and there just happened to be someone who was old enough to drive.
Yeah. For the 5 years that I took Trollwood June sessions, I can tell you without question, over those 5 years, the happiest I ever was in the month of June, because of taking video production classes at Trollwood under Greg Carlson. Because you're right. And the way that those classes work too is that they were actually twice the length of a normal class, because there's just so much more that's involved that you just need more time to be able to even cover everything. And so I think the best summer of my life was the 1 year that Trill would let me take video 1 and video 2. Because what I did was, I believe video 1 was in the morning. And so I'd get there at, 8 in the morning, spend my morning making videos with new friends under Greg Carlson, go to lunch, usually with Greg, to like Giovanni's or something, and then do more in video production 2 in the afternoon with people I'd done video with the previous year. It was so much fun. I've never laughed that hard. I've never felt that good. It was so much fun, and it completely infected me with the love of like doing collaborative art like that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so I really think it's because of that class that got me into something like Theater B, which doesn't make films, right? It's not a film production company, but it is a group of artists that get together and routinely collaborate. And having that in my life is something that I absolutely need. 100% need to have it in my life. Otherwise, I just can't go on.
And we're here talking about how amazing this class was, and Greg was the one who designed this class. I mean, yep. That's what you have to get at here, is that,
oh yeah,
the class was amazing, but it's only amazing because of how awe-inspiring Greg is. And you look at that, and we're talking about generation after generation after generation appreciated Greg and learn the value of a good nickname. And if you could make Greg laugh in that class with something you did, it was, you all of a sudden were completely valued in your idea that like, this will be funny. Trust me, listen, a giant worm costume is funny.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, those of us who are like his closest acolytes, you can see just in our own tastes how much he has affected us. Like how much of his vernacular we have adopted, right? And he had a teacher like that, Ted Larson, who was that important to him. Mm-hmm. And so, him doing this for us is him passing on to us what Ted did for him.
Right. Which
eventually we will do for others.
It's the whole point of this podcast. It's the fact that you and I are now to the generation of where we can be passing this on to the next. And I actually... I was just on another podcast with some, it's called The Corner Cast. You can seek it out. It's awesome. And a shout out to Madison and Ben, who have been binge listening to our episodes.
Really? I apologize, Madison and Ben.
Yeah. Enjoy. There's some real good ones out there. And then there's just some other ones. But what amazed me is like, it was like looking at you and I from, 16, 17 years ago.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah.
And
I was going to say 3 years ago, but yeah, sure. That makes sense.
But it was just, I mean, it just like what they do. Like they both live in this apartment, and, the television is constantly on the PS4 home screen, and
yep.
They've got guinea pigs, and it felt like it did when we were that age and we wanted to make something, and we were competing in the 48-hour film project. And, your biggest worry is like, am I going to make it to my video store job on time? And while I was talking to them, I thought to myself, like, this is my opportunity to like open some doors for these guys in any way that I can. These guys are hungry. They're ready to do whatever it takes to get to that next step and that next level. And I want to make sure that I not only encourage them, but I also, do anything I can to help them, because that's what we're talking about a lot with these adults. So like, while Greg didn't set you up into, like your really great career at a bank, you wouldn't be doing what you are right now if it wasn't for Greg. Is that too bold to say, or would you agree?
Oh, I mean, no, he's had such an impact that there's no way. It's hard for me to even understand what my existence would be like if he wasn't there. There's a lot of people in my life who had that effect. But yeah, with Greg, as far as it's really hard to know. If anything, I think he really helped me adopt some really healthy mindsets about the industry that have also served me as well. And I don't know if I would have gotten those. I think I would have probably continued pursuing filmmaking or video production in some form, but I think it would have been a far less rich experience.
Interesting. Okay, so we'll keep this thing moving on. My next person that I would like to honor is another educator, and that would be previous guest Gwen Stark. Gwen Stark was my high school performing arts teacher, and is one of the reasons I got into improv. Gwen allowed me to learn some really important lessons in high school about leadership, things that I still carry with me to today. She showed me the power of compassion, the strength that is listening, not just hearing someone, but listening and kind of digesting what they're saying and what they're doing, and how working hard can pay off in ways that you don't ever imagine beforehand. It was my first comedy school for sure. And the great thing about Gwen is at the end of the year, we had this end of the year variety show called Confetti, and you got to find out if you were funny or not because you had to write sketches, and the student body would, tell you whether or not they were funny when they came to sold out shows. I mean, we were over this course of a full run of that year performing for 1,500 people, and they either laugh or they don't. And they're like, nope, your funny voice here is not what we're looking for. And so
my grandpa was killed by a tractor last year.
Yeah, right. I remember we did one scene where I played a grandpa, and it's all my grandkids, and it's like my 100th birthday, and they're like, Grandpa, tell us a story. And so what I did is just pretty much regurgitated plot lines from movies. And so I told the story of when my good friend Alfred Molina and I were in the jungle looking for, and I had one grandkid who was like, that kind of sounds like the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the other kids start turning on him. And then it gets more specific and be like, have I ever told you about when I saw the world's most expensive diamond necklace? And he goes, I was sketching a young lady I had met on the Titanic. And the kids are all eating it up. And I remember that thing, people telling me the next day how hard they were laughing during that. And, then everyone had suggestions like, hey, tonight you should include this movie. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And I don't. But to me, Gwen, and that's the nice thing is Gwen fully said, listen, I don't understand what's funny to your generation. These, what's funny to my generation, there's some universal things, but not everything. And so sometimes she'd lean over and she'd ask me, she'd be like, why is this why is everyone laughing so hard at this? Be like, well, here's what you have to understand about saying the word shoes. And we'd go from there. And Gwen has remained a good friend of mine ever since, to the point of where, if things are difficult in my life, I still will give her a call and talk things out. And I'm constantly worried about her, and I hope that everything's going great for her. And I always tell her please, call on me for stuff, and if I can help you. She's helped me even in my professional career by giving me advice on things that she's seen, and she's one of the greatest champions for her students that I've ever met in my entire life. I'm just amazed at how awesome she was, and she opened a lot of doors for me too, because she did things like legitimized me to other adults who didn't know me. Right, I remember her, telling friends of hers when I was running for mayor, and they're like, yeah, this stupid kid who's running for mayor, and he doesn't know what he's doing. And she's like, actually, he's really well read on all the subjects, and you should give him the time of day. And they told me this then later on, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad I've got someone out there, pushing for me. And that's exactly who Gwen Stark is. She's somebody who would make sure that her students had opportunities, that she was, and also that they had a good time. It's supposed to be fun. We convinced her my junior year after Confetti was done to do a lock-in in the school. And she was the only adult present at the lock-in. And she didn't, she shouldn't have had to stay there until 7:00 in the morning, but she did. She did.
Oh my God.
I love that woman. And there are a lot of
that would be a nightmare of trying to stop all those kids from making out.
Oh God, right, you
guys go make out over there. We're gonna go make out over here. You five, you go make out over there. And then when she's breaking up one, the other two can make out for a bit. And then when she's breaking up that one,
right? She's like, when I get back here, you guys better be done making out.
When she was on the show, that I don't think I'd ever had a full conversation with her before. Like we'd met before, I'd said hello, but I can't recall a time before her coming on JJ Meets World that her and I had actually sat down and actually had a conversation. So that was really the first time I got to know Gwen Stark. And I found her to be just incredibly lovely in every sense of the word, like just a wonderful, warm, very maternal human being. And I could instantly see the connection as far as like how important she was to you and how important you were to her and how important her students are to her.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up around teachers. And so you can tell the teachers who are there, for whatever reason, and then the teachers who actually care.
Right.
And she's one of those.
Well, yeah, I can't say enough great things about Gwen Stark, and and she's somebody too who I have never heard her say one bad thing about another person. And which is amazing because it's really easy to kind of be catty. And I've never heard her say a disparaging mark against anybody, which is amazing to me considering like some people also like are very unnecessarily cruel to her in high school. Like I remember some students and then some faculty as well, and I don't think that that's fair at all, but she took it with so much grace. In fact, have you watched the show Ted Lasso by any chance?
I have not.
It's got Jason Sudeikis in it. It's about like an American football coach who's hired to coach a soccer team in London. And he's overly nice. Like if anyone out there has seen the show Ted Lasso, that's exactly who Gwen Stark is. Just incredibly nice to the point of where you wonder, like, what are you hiding? Are you a serial killer? Is that what's happening here? So just another wonderful woman. Okay, Tucker, back to you. Let's hear about another person who made an impact in your life.
So for my next entry on this list, I'm gonna actually combine a couple of people because they're really intrinsically linked. I have to put here the Wintersteins and the Horvicks. The Wintersteins and the Horvicks, after Greg Carlson, are the set of adults who are not my parents that have had the biggest impact on me by, again, an order of magnitude. So the Wintersteins and Horvicks, along with Amber Ray, started Theater B 20 years ago, and which is crazy to me to think that. And I met them when I was out of high school. After about a year, I think I was doing theater at like FMCT, and the cast went to go see a Theater B show, and that's where I first saw Kerry Winterstein. And not long after that, I saw Scott Horvick in a play, fell in love with him. And these were just some artists in town that decided to make their own theater company because they wanted to do their own thing. And I ended up grafting onto them instead of, say, like going to college and getting a degree in theater or anything else like that. I ended up getting not the same kind of thing, but I would call it an equivalent education, my version of an equivalent education, just by being a part of their group and working with them. And they're my sort of honorary aunts and uncles. They really, really are. And I turn to them in hard times as well when needed. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put into words the impact that those two couples have had on my life. I'm still in regular contact with them because they're all a part of Theater B. The Horvicks just moved back to town, thank God. So I've got them all back under one roof again, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, it's just, and they also approach getting to know younger people with the same notion of, we want to help these people grow. We see their potential and we're going to treat them seriously like adults. And that's what they did. And just having the framework of Theater B to work within and around was huge. Being at Theater B has taught me so many things, not just specific technical, how do you do XYZ things, but also conflict resolution, family matters, all ups and downs, thinking the theater might close, thinking the theater might be open forever, thinking we may lose everyone, thinking we may have too many people. It's been crazy. and it has been the foundation of my education post high school.
And it's interesting too, because that first adult couple you make friends with once when you still consider yourself kind of a kid, but they're gracious enough to invite you into their home and to not treat you like a kid. It makes a huge difference in a person's life. And if you find sometimes it's coworkers, sometimes it's neighbors. In your case, it happened to be people you collaborate with, which is very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they're rad. I mean, and two of them are teachers, David and Lori. So even as I just seem to continue to associate with teachers who are teachers, and really, really good teachers at that.
I think it's pretty awesome. And clearly teachers are the people who know and can value younger people too, really easily, because they work with them every single day. Right. So, they get to see that. And I think that's important. And I think that's a really cool thing that you get to experience there with them. And I'm so glad that even as your life continues to evolve, that they get to continue to be a part of that. Right.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, it's weird because their kids, I watched their kids grow up. Their kids feel like my little cousins to me, and their kids are adults in their mid-20s, and like Linka is doing amazing. I think she's about to get her degree if she hasn't already. It's crazy to watch these kids grow up. The Horvick's daughter, Torin, is the same age as my little brother Solomon, actually went to school with Solomon. So I've really watched Torin grow up as well. So doesn't that make you feel so old, dude?
Yeah, sometimes it does. It also makes me realize how like I lose track of time.
Yeah.
Right. Like where it's like, for example, like I remember going to someone's grad party, and now they're like, yeah, I'm now a professor at a college and I have my master's, and I go like, what? My $20 really went a long way in that grad card. Okay, so my next entry is somebody in my life who's very, very important. And Tucker, I bet you have never even met this person, nor have I don't think I've ever even talked about this person with you.
Yeah, I can't guess who it is.
So it's Mary Van Lith Sprecher. So Mary was the babysitter that I had for the longest section of my life when I was a young person. So my parents, very social people, they were in a dart league at one point, and they also went on vacations and went places. And at one point, it was very clear that we needed extra help in our household because my sister and I were not old enough to drive a car, let alone be left alone for an evening or like a weekend. And so my mom called up like the office administrator at Dawson Insurance, which was the company my grandfather ran, and said, I'm looking for someone who's interested in earning some extra money. And it would be awesome if they were younger and great with kids. And, they're like, so you're looking for a babysitter? And she's like, yes, I'm looking for a babysitter. And so we tried a couple of different people, and then Mary showed up. And Mary was younger. I think she was probably for sure in her 20s when she started babysitting us. And I think she started babysitting us when I was maybe 11, maybe 12, somewhere around there. And Mary became like a second parent. Actually, she was more like an older sibling to my sister and I. So sure, she was the authority figure, but she also was the person who taught us about the stuff that my parents just didn't have a grasp on. So for example, Mary taught me the lineup of must-see TV, NBC, Thursday nights, and included it with viewings of ER. Like, explain to me about how the show ER works and how they build these characters, and each character has an arc, and the arc goes through season to season. And it's, essentially taught me how like storyline lines are put together. And I never missed an episode of ER for like 4 years. Yeah. Like and when a character would leave, I would be devastated. And Mary,
Mom, I need another Diet Coke.
Right. And so Mary would also do things like like we got to go and hang out at her apartment. And she had this big, awesome old recliner in her apartment. And I remember when she was getting rid of it, she asked me if I wanted it. And she gave me my first piece of furniture ever. And I had this awesome recliner, and it moved with me like 4 times. And I loved that thing. It was just, it was so comfy, and I loved it. Mary also was somebody who at one point saw us more than just the kids that she babysat. We were her, we were how she trained into becoming a parent one day herself. She got to, I remember one day my sister went to the mall and was there for like 6 hours, and Mary was freaking out before cell phones, of course, because like, what is like a 13-year-old girl doing at the mall for that long? Right. And I remember Mary just being so mad at my sister, and I loved it because I wasn't getting in trouble at all. But Mary, so what's interesting is here's some of the things Mary taught me. So Mary started dating her now husband when she was babysitting Christy and I. So I remember one night, she was babysitting us for a whole weekend, and she showed up Friday night after like a date that she had been on. And the next morning she woke my sister and I up really, really early because she had to let us know that this guy, Mike, they went on a date, and it was so great. And he kissed her at the end, and she was so excited. And he's like, he kissed me.
Aww.
And so we were there at the very beginning, and then Mike became a part of our lives. And Mike was one of just the funniest guys. It was my first foray into an adult male relationship where you could just laugh at something for a long time, and someone says, "What are you laughing at?" And you tell them like, I honestly, I don't know anymore. I don't know what we were laughing at. And still to this day, we're talking, 25 years later, a quarter of a century later, whenever I see the movie Sleepy Hollow is on TV, I will text Mike, because Mike and I went to see Sleepy Hollow together. And we were at the Century Cinema, and we noticed this little kid, like the movie had started, and this little kid, way too little to be seeing that movie, lots of blood, was running up the stairs, and he had a big thing of popcorn, and he full on like face down falls in the aisle, and we're like 5 seats from the aisle. And so his popcorn goes flying, and there's like nobody says anything, and it's sort of this like beat, and then my friend Ben leans over and goes, you okay? This kid just shoots up, and he's obviously so embarrassed, and he just runs and doesn't clean up his popcorn or anything like that. And so here we are laughing while there's a decapitated scene on on the movie screen, and people are telling us to be quiet. They're laughing so hard. But it was the fact that like Ben didn't go over to check on this kid. He just, you all right?
Yeah, what else do you say?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's what I would have done if I had been on the end. And they just, and at one point, my sister and I tricked Mike into renting the Jerry Springer, Best of Jerry Springer VHS tape for us. That was NC-17 because it has stuff you can't see on television.
Yeah.
And it was a weekend where he was babysitting us because Mary was out of town. And then when she found out, she was livid. She's like, "What? You rented this movie for these kids? Are you kidding me?" He's like, "They said that they had already seen it. They were lying, Mike. They were lying to you." And I remember one of the greatest honors of my life is Mike and Mary got married, and it was my parents, their parents, and maybe like 2 friends, and then Chrissy and I were asked to be in the wedding. And because we were like their younger siblings, and they've been there through some of the hardest times. Nobody understands my family life and the trials and tribulations that took place in the walls of my house better than those 2, because they were there for a lot of it, and they went above and beyond, and they were the people who, sure, they were paid to be our babysitters at one point, but like they were more than that. And I still can count on them to this day as friends. and now they have kids of their own, and and they look exactly the same too. Whatever they're putting in their water, my God, they look just as good as they did when they were, in their 20s and early 30s. They are people that I respect deeply. They are people who treated me differently. I even remember at one point, Mike's mom lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and was moving back to Bismarck, North Dakota. And they asked me if I would come help them with the move. And I said, sure. And so, part of it was I drove the U-Haul for a while, and, like I had just gotten my permit, and I was a part of this operation, and I had such a good time. And I can't tell you how amazing it was to be part of their peer group, and when I really had no business getting that level of respect or appreciation from them. And I'm just sort of I'm even today I'm amazed at how much I learned from them, like you'd learn from an older sibling, and the things that I respect so much about them now. And like Mike, his senior picture, he has so much product in his hair that it looks like Soul Glow from the movie Coming to America. And I remember looking at that and being like I loved it. I laughed at it. And he was the guy who told me too about how important it is to like not take yourself too seriously.
Right.
And he's like, yep. He goes, yep. 1991 was a different time. And I love those guys more than anything. And I should make more opportunities to get to see them on a more regular basis. And I don't. And that's something I hope to correct, especially as their kids get older. And I can be more of a part of their adult life, and they can be more of my adult life. But they did things for me that taught me about, the things that your parents can't teach you, because your parents want you to follow the rules. And these are the people who told me, like, listen, you don't have to follow the rules, but you do have to respect the authority that puts the rules together. And so know that if you get caught, you're going to pay the price, and you get to make that decision. Like, you can try and sneak out of your room at night, and if you get caught, you get caught, and you have to know that now's the time to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. They taught me about things in media. So like, I remember learning all the words to Alanis Morissette's first album because Mary picked it up and we listened to it in her Jeep Grand Cherokee nonstop. And they also brought a unique perspective to me too about how, so Mary worked for my grandfather. Okay. And she told me things about my grandfather that I never knew, because I only saw him as my grandfather. And she explained what he was like as a boss and the impact he made on her life by giving her opportunities and treating her as more than just an employee. It opened my eyes to how someone views, how my view of the same human being can be drastically different than the next person. And
was this negative or positive?
It was way positive. Okay. For example, when Mary was younger,
does that mean that you had a negative view of your grandfather?
No, not. But I didn't have the same. Like, my view of my grandfather was a guy who I thought was super classy and was really nice and was an amazing businessman. And I thought that he built that company on his own. Right.
Got it.
And what I learned from Mary was that he didn't build that company on his own. He built that by empowering the people who worked for him to make that company bigger and better all the time.
Gotcha.
Here's another example too. So my grandfather I never knew this at all, but I only know it because of Mary. So when Mary was younger, she was involved in an accidental in-home gun incident where her brothers were playing with a handgun and shot it, and she got shot right in the eye.
Oh my God.
Yep. And so she didn't, it's like the eye had no pigment in it. It was very just like cloudy, and she survived. So obviously,
Oh my gosh.
But at one point she had the opportunity to get what was sort of like an eye transplant. And it was going to be expensive, and it was also going to require a lot of time off.
Right.
And Mary told me, she goes, like, she went in to talk to my grandfather about it, and he personally was like, yep, I'm going to make sure that part of this gets paid for. Like, it's not through the company. I want to, I'm going to help you. You take as much time as you need, as much recovery time, and don't worry about using up vacation time. This is us supporting. Essentially, she said this happened because of his generosity.
Wow. So she got an eye transplant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is really another really cool thing you learn, like, as a kid too. Like,
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. And I don't think she can see out of it.
Okay.
But I think that it balances the like appearance of her face. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yep. I got it.
But even like that was just fascinating as a kid, this whole thing, because she had to go down to the Twin Cities to get it done.
Right.
And so it involved, like her having to stay in a hotel for a while. And like my grandfather, like, valued his employees enough to say, like, listen, I want to make sure that this happens for you. I want to make a personal investment in what you're doing. And my grandfather never talked about that. And you want to know why he never talked about that? Because he just knew that was the right thing to do. And so he didn't want accolades. He wasn't looking for, like, everyone to be like, that Jim Dawson, what a great guy. And it's not that I didn't think he was a great guy, but I realized, like, people can be can mean something completely different to individuals that maybe never will meet. Right. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I value that too. I value her giving me that perspective on my grandfather that I never knew, because I'm amazed by that. So she was awesome. Both Mike and Mary, and I have no idea if they listen to this podcast, but now they have to, because I've complimented. In fact, that's what we should do on JJ Meets World, is just compliment so many different people that it forces them into listening to this podcast. Do you have another one for me? Another person who made a big influence on your big impression on your life?
Well, I mean, there are so many. It's hard for me to single out another one at this point. And most of the people that I'm thinking of are people that I met well into adulthood, and who maybe aren't ones that guided me in the same way, but, had meaningful impact as well. So if I were to add one more person to this list, it would be someone I actually got to know as an adult. And his name is Kerry Shelton. He was my boss at Sundog for a number of years. And I'm still in touch with him. Kerry is great. Kerry is the best, most experienced film shooter you're going to find, video and film shooter in North Dakota. And Kerry is just also the best boss I have ever had. 100% nurturing, all business, but not all serious. And just very, I don't know how to put it. He's got that sort of soft touch, right? He doesn't need to raise his voice with you, because if he's disappointed in you or not, right? and you don't want that disappointment. You don't want to let him down. But Kerry is he's just a great guy. And I had a series of really bad bosses before I got to Kerry. And so it was like, oh, this is what this should feel like. This is what this should look like. And he has been a really great example to me of what I would like to be if I'm ever in his position at some point. If I'm ever at a point where I do have people in an organization who work technically under me, I want to make sure that I'm doing my job in the Kerry Shelton mold and not in the mold of a few other bosses I've had in the past. So shout out to Kerry Shelton, previous podcast guest as well. He kicks ass.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, Kerry's one of those guys too, who, when someone says like, hey, JJ, we're going to do this thing. And I say, well, who's going to be involved? And they're like, Kerry Shelton. I'm like, yep, sign me up. Yep. I will be there with bells on.
Mm-hmm. But do you think there are people in your life that look at you this way right now, JJ, as far as like people who would list you on their podcast of adults? There are people in my life who I care about deeply, who I definitely hope to be that for them someday, but it's still early, and I'm still it's amazing too how much I'm learning from them, at the same time. And it makes me wonder what kind of an impact I had on these adults who had an impact on me. So, I mean, at the very least, are there people who maybe you see them as someone that you're helping? You don't have to name them, but people that you're helping come up in the world, they have an impact on you at the same time, though, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that there are people out there that will say like, yep, JJ Gordon, he went to bat for me, or JJ Gordon, I know I can call him any time of the day and he'll tell it to me straight. I don't know who those people would be. And I also wonder if the people that I've listed in this podcast know that about me, right? Like maybe that's what the whole piece is, because we're not talking about a mentorship here. We're talking about friendship and respect. And right. Sometimes you don't even realize it as it's going on if you're that person who has that great bedrock and is ready to do that for another person. I really hope that there are people out there who count me in on that. And if they don't, I definitely need to be more active about it. But I think it's important to give a little bit of your time. Right. So,
even in certain disciplines, there's like a lineage, right? Because like if you think of martial arts, right? Who was your sensei? Who is your sensei? Who is your sensei? Right? So I only met Ted Larson one time. So I was never an acolyte of Ted Larson. I'm an acolyte of Greg Carlson, who was an acolyte of Ted. I'm using the word acolyte in jest, but it's apt still at the same time. And if I ever have someone who considers them to be an acolyte of me, then you can kind of say in say the discipline of, say, filmmaking, then you could sort of say there's a lineage, right? Because Ted deeply influenced Greg, who deeply influenced me, still influences me. And at some point I'll be deeply influencing someone else. And that's kind of neat to think too, right? Like there's a passing down of culture, of lessons, of wisdom, of knowledge that happens in that way.
Right.
Like, do you think you're part of any particular lineage in any discipline in your life?
I think with improv, with 100%, because the people who taught me some of the most important things I learned about improv were taught by the Del Closes and the
right.
Alan Aldas of the world, and so on and so forth. And so I think that to me, that's the next thing that I can impart to a generation. And maybe that's what I should be concentrating more on, is the fact that I get an opportunity to work with a lot of people in improv, and some of them are just at the very start of their career, whether it's in high school or at a professional level. And I get to share some of the groundbreaking things that I learned back in the day. So probably improv. That's what I think it would be.
Right on.
And I think that
right on.
I think if you're somebody who right now like is taking stock of like, oh yeah, this is the person that made a difference with me. First of all, it'd be a great thing if you are able to send them a message and let them know that, if they're still, if they haven't shuffled off this mortal coil, and just track them down. Track them down. Just do the effort. Don't just search on Facebook, but track them down. And then secondly, to think about those people who are asking you for something or need that, 5 minutes of your attention and what it means to them. And, the difference between having lunch in your office and watching Hulu versus going with someone and having lunch and having a conversation where you ask questions about who they are and what they like and what they enjoy. And if you can be like, well, listen, if you really enjoy that, you got to listen to Janet Jackson's Paisley Park album.
Right.
You have no idea what kind of legacy you're going to leave with that next generation. So that's my 2 cents. And there's some great gratitude there. Sorry to anyone who says like, I spent so much time teaching that kid how to juggle and he doesn't even mention me on his GD podcast. Maybe next time we'll get it. But these are the ones that really, that really grabbed my attention right off the bat. And, speaking of grabbing attention, Tucker, we are getting dangerously close to our 250th episode. Woo-hoo! And sometimes when people ask me like, how, like, oh, you've been doing your podcast for a while, and I'm like, yeah, we're almost to 250 episodes, and
that's crazy.
I know. I think it's just absolutely amazing, and whether you are listening for the 230th time or this is the second episode you've ever listened to before, we're glad to have you as a listener on JJ Meets World. And if you didn't know this, like, for example, if you're a new listener, we keep an Easter egg at the end of every single episode. So if you listen through the end credits and our kind ask for you to be a Patreon to keep the lights on, we have something hidden at the very end of every episode. So it's worth it to hit that or to correctly hit the, skip 15 seconds on the right spot. So just letting everybody know that. And I'm looking forward to another 250 with Tucker. Reach out to us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email us. You can check us out at jjmeetsworld.com. And gosh, from here on out, Tucker, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do a shrimp boil today. So I gotta get ready and go get some tinfoil happening.
Boil them scramps.
Yeah, don't do #boil though with it, because you get some really unsavory looking things that happen when you do #boil.
Pop them boils.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. Before this episode began, Tucker and I talked for way longer than you would expect about toilet paper.